revealing not one crime, but an interconnected web of secrets stretching back nearly 20 years. The forensic team, working under arc lights in the biting cold, made the second critical discovery. Wrapped within the inner folds of the tarp, pressed against the victim's torso, was not just the bracelet. There was also a small, water-damaged slip of paper, its ink blurred but not entirely lost. It was a fragment of a shipping manifest. Partial letters, numbers, a code CR22***, and a faded logo, almost unrecognizable, a stylized mountain peak encircled by a gear. This was the logo of the now-defunct Crestline Mining and Transport ***, a company that had ceased operations a decade prior after a controversial land dispute and a fatal tailings pond collapse that had poisoned a local watershed. The company's assets, including its fleet of trucks and industrial containers, had been liquidated in a bankruptcy auction scattered across 4 states. The victim, identified through dental records as Liam Walsh ***24, was a graduate student in environmental geology at the University of Colorado, Boulder. His thesis work centered on post-industrial land reclamation, with a specific focus on abandoned mining sites in the Rocky Mountain region. According to his advisor and friends, Liam had become intensely, privately focused on the Crestline collapse in the weeks before his disappearance. He believed the official report was a cover-up, that the environmental damage and loss of life were far greater than documented. He told his roommate he was tracking the ghosts of Crestline, following a paper trail of sold equipment and displaced workers. His last known location was a roadside diner 60 miles from Montrose, where he'd met with a contact he'd only referred to in texts as the mechanic. The dark pickup truck with the missing hubcap led to a dead end. It was a common model, the plates obscured by mud in the footage. But the CR22** code was a new vector. Cross-referencing the partial manifest with old Crestline bankruptcy files, investigators found a match. CR-designated cargo containers and drums slated for secure, long-term storage of low-level toxic byproducts. 22 was a lot number. The records showed lot CR20 to contain 14 identical steel drums, sold as a unit at auction 12 years ago to a shell company called High Plains Disposal Solutions, LLC ***. High Plains had no physical office, no employees. Its registration led to a lawyer in Denver who handled hundreds of such incorporations and remembered nothing. The trail should have gone cold. But in the lawyer's archived digital correspondence, a forensic accountant found a single email thread. The point of contact for High Plains was a man named Elias Vance A background check on Vance lit up the system. He was a former safety compliance officer for Crestline Mining. He'd been the whistleblower on the tailings pond, testifying before a state committee. His testimony was initially heralded, then thoroughly discredited by a subsequent corporate investigation that alleged Vance had falsified data out of professional grievance. He was fired, blacklisted, and vanished from public records 8 years ago. Vance was not a ghost. He was a man with a motive, a man whose life was destroyed by Crestline, who had intimate knowledge of their equipment and their darkest secrets. He now became the prime person of interest. But was he a killer, or was he another victim? The search for Vance led investigators to a ramshackle cabin deep in the San Juan National Forest, purchased under an alias 5 years prior. The cabin was empty, but it was not abandoned. It was a workshop, a library, a command center. Wall-to-wall maps were pinned with photographs, dates, and red string. Ledgers detailed the movements of former Crestline executives, contractors, and the state inspectors who had signed off on the faulty pond. In a locked metal cabinet, they found Liam Walsh's student ID, his notebook computer, and 3 other IDs belonging to missing persons, a freelance journalist from Durango who had been investigating industrial corruption, a former Crestline truck driver who had testified in Vance's defense, and an EPA junior analyst who had been reassigned off the Crestline case. Vance wasn't just obsessed. He was hunting. Most chilling, however, was the schematic taped to the drafting table. It was a hand-drawn, meticulous diagram of the monstrous barrel, but it was one of 5. Each barrel was labeled with a code CR221, CR222, CR223, CR224, CR May 22. Liam Walsh was in barrel 1. The schematic indicated planned placement sites forming a rough, 50-mile radius across a remote stretch of national forest. It was a grotesque garden. Vance wasn't just hiding bodies. He was planting them, but why? The answer came from the notebook of Liam Walsh, which forensic techs managed to unlock. His final entries were a cascade of terrified realization. He'd met Vance, believing him to be a fellow truth-seeker. Vance had been helpful, providing documents, pointing him to the mechanic, the former Crestline yard foreman who knew where the leftover drums were stored. But Liam's last entry read, *, he doesn't want exposure. He wants replication. He's not trying to prove the collapse was murder. He's trying to finish it. The barrels aren't graves. They're the payload. CR222 wasn't for toxic sludge. The manifest was a blind. It was for the chemical precursors. He's been acquiring them for years. The bodies, I think the bodies are just the carriers. He's turning them into vessels. To poison the watershed all over again, to make the crime scene so vast and toxic no one can bury it this time. He's going to make the land itself bear witness. Vance was an engineer of ruin. Failing to bring Crestline to justice through the system, he had decided to reenact their crime on a more horrifying, undeniable scale, using the company's own branded containers. The victims were not random, they were people connected to the original cover-up, or those, like Liam, who were getting too close to his own planned catastrophe. Their bodies infused with a stabilized cocktail of the very toxins that had leaked from the tailing spawn were to be placed in strategic locations where seasonal snowmelt would seep into the barrels and carry the contamination into the headwaters of 3 major rivers. Barrel 1 had been placed. Liam was inside. But the discovery by the hiker had disrupted Vance's timeline. The other 4 barrels, and the other 3 victims, were still out there, either already placed and undiscovered, or Vance was still holding them, forced to adapt his gruesome timeline. The investigation exploded from a homicide into a bioterrorism and environmental catastrophe scenario. The FBI, EPA, and CDC were now co-leads. The forester on Montrose was quarantined. Geological survey teams used ground-penetrating radar and chemical sniffers to search for other barrels. The press caught wind of the Crestline copycat or the Watershed Killer, and the national narrative shifted from a true crime mystery to a looming disaster. Then, a break. A park ranger, reviewing game camera footage from a remote ridge, spotted a man matching Vance's description, leading a mule train. The mules were carrying heavy, cylindrical loads draped in tarps. The timestamp was 3 days after the discovery of Barrel 1. Vance was on the move, relocating his remaining payloads. A massive, silent manhunt convened. Special operations teams were inserted into the high country. They found the second barrel CR222 in a high alpine basin, buried under a rock cairn. It contained the remains of the freelance journalist. It was intact, undisrupted. The third barrel CR223 was found empty, abandoned near Vance's cabin, as if he'd been forced to leave it behind. The fourth and fifth barrels, and the bodies of the truck driver and the EP analyst, were missing. The chase culminated at a derelict Crestline mining at a horizontal mine shaft sealed with a rusted gate that had been recently cut open. Thermal drones detected a heat signature deep inside. Negotiation teams called in, but there was only silence from the dark tunnel. When the tactical team made entry, they found a scene of macabre, industrial horror. The tunnel had been turned into a laboratory. The fourth barrel was open, empty. The fifth stood sealed in the center of the space. Elias Vance, gaunt and fever-eyed, was dead by his own hand, a pistol in his lap. On a makeshift desk was a final ledger. It contained not just names, but calculations, flow rates, dilution ratios, seasonal melt projections. It was the final proof of his intended ecological massacre. A note, addressed to whoever finally listens, read, *You silence the whistle. Now hear the scream of the land. They are part of it now. The truth is in the water. The body of the truck driver was found in the sealed fifth barrel. The EP analyst was never physically located. Vance's notes suggested her remains had been prepared and dispersed using a different method. Her identity dissolved into the ecosystem he sought to weaponize. In the aftermath, the legal and environmental reckoning was staggering. The original Crestline collapse was reopened. Families of the original victims filed new suits. The 3 identified victims of Vance received funerals, their names cleared of the shadow of random violence. Liam Walsh was posthumously awarded his degree, his work heralded as the key that prevented a second, deliberate tragedy. But the silence of the woods is different now. The mystery of the first barrel was solved, but it gave birth to deeper, more uncomfortable truths about corruption, vengeance, and the line between seeking justice and becoming a monster. The EPA maintains permanent monitoring stations in the San Juan headwaters. The barrel sites are cordoned off with biohazard placards, not police tape. The nation got its answers, but no peace. The question changed from who was in the barrel to how many Elias Vances are we creating. The barrels were physical objects, their locations now known. But the poison Vance truly dealt in, the bitterness of injustice left to fester, that remains in the system, less easily contained, waiting for the next pressure point. The next fragile mind to decide that if the world will not listen to a whisper, it must be forced to hear a scream.